I didn't mean to assume maybe all of you were here. We have a date for our second test, which is the 18th. Okay. All right. In addition, what did I want to tell you? Palmer Chiropractic is going to be here on Wednesday, April 1st. One of their biomechanics professors is a former student of mine, graduate of this program, Dr. Jesse Hodges, and he's a real good dude. And so he's going to be coming with their administration people. They're going to set up booths outside, but they're treating anybody that wants to go to Dino's South, I want to say, to dinner and just chit-chat, answer questions. And so I'm going to have some more information on that. It's like between 6 and 6:30. Not that you got to eat and get out. It's just that they're debating whether to start at 6 or 6:30. Even if you're not interested in it, I think chiropractic, not to get on a soapbox here, but has a lot of value in terms of reducing muscle spasm, and I'll tell you why. I really respect Stephen Kramer a lot, and I've heard Kramer, mention that, at the end of the day, there's a lot of different ways to try to reduce muscle spasm: massage, acupuncture, and a lot of physical therapists now are learning some of these techniques, right? They call it something different, joint lobes, and they call it dry needling. But the research has shown, now it may not be because of the same reasons, like me and Dr. Hodges agree with that. You have a lot of old school chiropractors, and he's like, and the new guys, we're trying to work with other allied health professions. So it may behoove you to kind of learn a little bit about it. If anything, whatever field you go into, you may want to work with one of these two, or hey, let's all work together and make the world a better place. In addition, I shared a link on Facebook, and I shared it to the KPA. Did anybody see where LSU Shreveport is looking for some feedback for their occupational therapy program? They're looking in terms of student interest about making that program into a master's, into a doctorate program. And the carrot they're holding for your survey time is like a $25 gift card to the Starbucks or something. But just in terms of if you're interested in occupational therapy, you're like, heck yeah, man. Or maybe you're like, heck no, man. But that's available. If you can't find it, email me. I'll send you the link to the survey. I think that's all about housekeeping. This morning I reminded 310 why I wear these shirts all the time, because of my bursitis, and I had a meme of Will Smith pointing to the washing machine. Why do you wear the same clothes all the time? Washing machine. I thought that was fun. All right, you ready to have an open mind today? Open your minds. Guys, one of the limitations about learning muscle function is that it is undoubtedly talked about in open chain. And remember, open chain, for lack of a better term, is just distal segment movement about process there. So it's always talked about in terms of puppets, right? You got string, movement, string. But we sure as heck know that movement, especially from 310, doesn't have to always look like this. Movement doesn't have to look like this, it could look like this. And undoubtedly that creates some interesting magical properties that occur. This is nothing but illusions. It's not that we change the rules. It's not that anything changed. It's just different. It's just a different way to look at it. If we're doing a squat, and I know there's a lot of different ways you can do ball squats, you can do snatches. So just pick a squat, just a general squat where we are going to infer that you're going to have ankle, hip, and knee motion. Okay? In biomechanics, we call that simultaneous motion. Multiple joints moving at the same time to do something. In this case, it's trying to translate your pelvis and everything on top up and down, like a hydraulic lift. Okay? The hip and knee can't move individually or you'd fall on your butt. In other words, hey knee, extend just by yourself. You propel yourself forward. And if you said, hey hips, extend by yourself, you propel yourself back. They must move at the same time to achieve translation of your center of mass and keeping your center of mass over your base of support so you don't fall down. Now, How do separate groups of muscles communicate that? That's why you don't come out of your mama running, and that takes time. Right? It takes time to learn how to walk. It takes time to learn how to coordinate all of these different muscles through innovation. Remember, maybe it was last week or a few classes ago, I said that a lot of researchers and theorists think that muscle strains and pulls is all just miscommunication. Someone was supposed to do something and they didn't, leaving something else to do too much of the work. So think of something as simple like a squat where you have to coordinate synchronous innervation of hip muscles, knee muscles, ankle muscles. And at the same time, let's think about some ridiculous weights some of these people are squatting. I saw a viral thing about a football recruit like squatting like 700 or 800 pounds. So there has to be some kind of mechanical advantage to be able to. So think of it like this. Do you think proportionally people bench more than they row? Yeah, like some people can bench like 600-700 pounds. I doubt they can row that. So there must be something magical about kind of these hydraulic lift kind of things. And their answer is when you're doing pushing motions, you get to use bone to compress against bone. When you're doing pulling motions, bones are trying to get pulled apart from bone. You can't compress them into each other and use bone as a pushing mechanism. That's one of the limiting factors. What I want you to notice is, it is impossible to stay balanced, to do this functional task without moving the hips and the knees at the same time. For the way I did it, the ankle's going to move too. But sometimes you can really keep your weight on your heels and not have as much ankle stuff, but your knees and your hips have to move together. Yes? And we also agree that to squat 1,000 pounds, there better be something else happening than just big, strong muscles. So if the task is hips, knees, ankles, we have to work together. We have to coordinate our pulls. We have to coordinate our work. Don't look at it as knee separate, hips separate, ankle separate. Literally look at it as a hydraulic system and they're all working together. Now this doesn't go against analyze motion joint by joint muscle. I'm not saying that. I'm just trying to show you how we can look at muscle function a little differently. Take a look at this. What if the gastrocnemius pulls there, right? Crosses the knee in the back, right? So traditionally we only look at it as a knee flexor because traditionally all we ever do is look at muscles, which they say. But we know from vectors that part of this pull has a downward component, but part of that pull has a horizontal component. Now the downward component is good for stability, right? But that horizontal component, if this was a stick figure and I applied a force here, what direction of motion would I be pulling in? At the knee. You don't say. That's some freaky stuff. Well, I'm pulling on the femur. I'm pulling on the femur. Well, wouldn't I also be pulling in the direction of hip extension? Think about it. If I pull the femur this way, what would happen? If I take the femur and do this would move, and that would move. Or one to move. Another term in biomechanics, you're like, well, the knee gets injured a lot. It's the longest, two longest bones of the body and big torques. Your muscles also have torque advantage here if you look at it in a different way. Me pulling here is very far away from the hip joint. Me pulling here is far away from the ankle joint. Not so much far at the knee, but the magic isn't at the knee. The magic is at the hips and the ankles. But that muscle pulling where it's at. All right, that's gastroc. Take a look at this guy. I'm only giving it to you because you already know it. Hamstrings go from pelvis, cross the knee in the back, and they insert here. Right? The lower leg, biceps femoris is on the fibula, semimembranosus, semitendinosus on the tibia. Regardless, they pull in this area. Some of that pull is up, some of that pull is across. Well, guess what the hamstrings are doing? And we already know that they're considered hip extensors, but my point is that you cannot pull in the direction of hip extension without pulling in the direction of the other motions as well, because they're all connected. They're connected through hydraulics. So the hamstrings here pulling on that tibia is pulling at this joint, influencing this joint, influencing this joint, and influencing that joint all at the same time. That's freaky cool. And it explains why that sucker's so important to function. But it goes further than that. So we've already kind of established that the gastroc gives a little contribution up here. How appropriate that they kind of crisscross applesauce. Even the gluteus maximus. Let's say the gluteus maximus crosses the hip posterior and inserts somewhere over here. So traditionally, we just think of the gluteus maximus in this open chain function of hip extension. But my point is that when your feet are locked and the hips and the knees have to move together, when the gluteus maximus, if it's working concentrically and it's causing hip extension, the knee has to go with it. So technically, indirectly, it's also functioning as a knee extension. And indirectly, it's also functioning as, they're all working together, is what I'm trying to get you to see. Because to squat 1,000 pounds, Jack, you better have some extra magical things happen. Now, I didn't freak you out yet. This one's going to freak you out. This one's going to freak you out. The quadricep, semimembranosus, tendinosus, that's the hands. Vastus medialis, lateralis, intermedius, rectus, femoris, right? The quads. Knee extensors, pulling in the direction of knee extension, but you've only been taught the open chain function. Where the true magic, guys, this is why you truly have a patella. This is why. And it's the reason, if you put your hand on your patella, do it right now, put your hand on your patella and kind of flex next to your knee. You feel all that popping and grinding? You weren't born with that. Your car, when your brakes start to wear away, you hear the sounds and you feel the squeaks, you know you got to change your brakes. You don't just change this. I guess technically you can. But my point is that you're never going to replace something as functional as what you were born with. Check this out. Muscles can only, well, what are muscles pulling on? Bones. Bones can push, Jack. Bones can push. So remember, it's not just this, it's also this. Now the patella floats in that tendon. It doesn't end on one and start the other. Sometimes people will call the bottom part the patella ligament because they overthink it. They're like, it's going from bone to bone. The quad tendon doesn't stop on the top and it starts at the bottom. It literally encompasses, passes through. The patella is floating inside the same structure. But the point is that the quad, whether it's the quad tendon or patella tendon, are pulling in opposite linear directions, but the same horizontal direction. Think of it as a bowstring. And the string on the top and the string on the bottom are pulling in different up downs, but they're pulling in the same across. So let me get these out of the way. These cancel out and they work together to do this. That patella is literally pushing your knee into extension. The patella can push, muscles pull, right? But now it should make sense why there's so much grind and wearing away when you have that patella providing excessive compression because it's being pushed into that, and then, oh, by the way, it's being grinded as you flex and extend. It makes sense why you wear away that cartilage over time. It's being driven into it. You can do these thought experiments where if somebody's doing a squat, I know you wouldn't do this, but if someone's stuck, you can come into the front and just give a little push. That's going to help them lock out. That's what the patella is doing. So now we can look at this a little freaky. We could say, yes, the quad is a knee extensor. It is. Because this motion, in terms of direction of its influence, is knee extension. But again, if the knee moves, guess what also moves? The hip. So not only is it pushing far away, it's pushing on what's below and it's pushing on what's beyond. They're all working together. Remember when we talked about the shoulder, how it behooves us when we get lats and pecs, these big muscles that kind of work together to do stuff? It's the same thing. How do you squat 1,000 pounds? You figure out a way to get your quads and your glutes, and you find a way to get all of these big, powerful muscles to pull in the same direction. Now, we can't see that when all we do is look at open chain, but we can see when we look at it in closed that we have several big, powerful muscles all contributing to the same thing. Heck, even our plantar flexors all have contribution in that same direction. It's pretty cool. So why did I want to talk about this is because when we start to get into knee muscles and hip muscles, again, all of our basic understanding of these is from references of open chain stuff. But when you create hydraulic lifts, same thing goes with push-ups. When you create hydraulic lifts, muscles can only pull, but bones can push. And when that tricep is pulling on that olecranon is pushing on our humerus, pushing us into extension when we go up, and still pushing, but letting us come down, and flexion as we go down. Muscles pull, but bones can sure as heck push. Any questions or clarifications on that? So I'm not rewriting the script on you, but I am just introducing you to the fact that when we're talking about hydraulics, when we're talking about simultaneous motion, there's, Brian, in sports, each group kind of has their own little group. When I was an athletic trainer, the wide receivers did stuff together, they were a group, and then the running backs would do stuff together, they were a group, and then but then they'd come together and run a play as a team. That's kind of an analogy that I'm working here, where yes, we're going to talk about the hip extensors as kind of like a wide receiver group, and we're going to talk about the knee flexors and extensors as kind of their position groups. But guys, sometimes those cats come together and they run a play and they're all working together. And this group affects the other group. The quarterback affects the route that the wide receivers run. They all have to kind of do their part. Okay? So again, when you're thinking about the squat, think of it as independent joints, but they're all working together to create a function. All right. Good job. Open your books to the KNES. Let's see, right KNES. All right. The KNES, super duper simple and anatomical position. We're going to have anterior crossing muscles that pull in the direction of knee extension. We're going to call those knee extensors. We have posterior crossing muscles that can be pulled in the direction of deflection, what they call those knee flexors. When the knee is flexed, which is not on your circle, because your circle is in anatomical position, when your knee is flexed, medial crossing muscles, or at least the ones I'm going to give you, pull in the direction of internal rotation. The lateral crossing muscle, I'm going to teach you, pulls in the direction of lateral rotation. First of all, we got a bunch of medial crossing muscles. And that's going to come in handy when we cut and plant, because although we want to give some external rotation, we don't want to give too much, right? Our knee's going to rip apart. So having some extra internal or medial rotators there as stabilizers is not a bad thing. Right? So flexors, extensors. Remember, the knee is a modified hinge where you can flex, you can extend, but when the knee is flexed, you have some rotation going on. And remember why that rotation is there is so that you can cut and plant and not rip apart your knee every time you do so. Can someone still hurt their knee? Absolutely. But nowhere near what would happen if our knee only allowed flexion extension. I mean, pretty much if our knee only did this and this, pretty much any time we went to change direction, we'd rip it apart like a chicken. So that's why the knee allows for this and the elbow doesn't. You need that rotation allowance. All right, let's get to some muscles. What? Walmart and pin cookies out of hand sanitizer. Ugh. Oh, is it gonna hit? Oh! What a trooper. I put some ice on that, buddy. All right. Let's see. So many steps. Dyslexics like me don't do steps very well. Mute. No, unmute. Is that on? Display. Yay. All right, man. Let's get going on this. The first one, I like to my homage to Biggie, sartorius. It's the longest muscle in the body. It's cool. It's a big, long strap-like muscle. Back in the old, I say the old days, but they would refer to it as the Taylor's muscle, and the reason is because its function. At the hip, it's a hip flexor. It's a very weak external rotator. At the knee, it's a knee flexor and an internal rotator. So imagine these people. Now we have machines to do a lot of this, but back in the day when we didn't have machines, imagine someone sitting with their legs crossed for hours and hours and hours and hours. Remember we talked about this, right? You put your arm in a sling, it's going to get stiff. So these tailors would have their sartorius shortened. They would literally be putting in a sling all day. And over the course of time, they'd be getting these contractures and these real tight sartorius muscles. We call it the Taylor's muscle. Now, there's a biomechanical advantage of having long muscles versus, did y'all learn about this in physics, like kinnate structure and different structures of muscles? So, long muscles biomechanically inserting very far away, give it a mechanical advantage of force production, but the fact that the muscle is very long actually gives an advantage of speed. Meaning that if you slot all the muscles in sections, you kind of have to recruit them compartmentally. It takes longer for that wave to reach the end. But if you line everything up like this, then when you pull here, it's influencing the other side. It gets the influence further down faster when you line everything up in nice straight lines versus slotting them in sections. Okay. What does the sartorius do at the knee? Well, it's kind of a bad picture. It's a great picture at the hip. It's kind of a bad picture at the knee because it doesn't really differentiate that bilateral axis at the knee, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to find a lateral view, a different view of the sartorius. Sartorius, C, bilateral view. That's not bad. That's not really good. Okay. All right. You athletic trainers probably on your test, and you have to learn about that insertion on the pes inserine. I always think of a little pes. In terms of its origins, it's anterior superior, rectus is anterior inferior. But in terms of function, none of that matters. What functions is how does it cross? Okay? How does it cross? It's going to cross the hip in the front. We'll get to hip stuff later. But the key thing here, and this picture may not illustrate it as much as I was hoping, is that your bilateral axis for your knee, Brian, remember in 310 I talked about general motion versus pure motion, right? Pure rotation. The knee joint kind of orbits, meaning that this would be more pure rotation. But it doesn't do that, it does this. It kind of orbits the femur when it's moving in over chain. So I asked this to my dad one time. This is a cool question. I thought about it, and he was like, Brian, you're wasting my time. I said, Dad, when I show you my knuckles like this bone right there, right, your knuckle bone, I said, is it part of this bone or is it part of that bone? And he was like, maybe it looks like this one. And I was like, no, it's not. It's part of that one. I'm like, oh. I'm joking, I didn't do that. But look, here's the point. The knuckle is part of this bone, and the proximal phalanx orbits it. It doesn't have pure rotation, right? It kind of goes around like a star. Like a planet would orbit a star. In other words, there's some translation, and then there's some rotation. Okay? So that's what's happening at the knee. So sometimes when you kind of have this kind of stuff happening, that bilateral axis isn't always right smack in the middle of the joint. That's what I'm trying to get you to see. Okay? So the bilateral axis for the knee is kind of, it's kind of more anterior. And this is another way we know it's more anterior. This is really cool. Y'all are familiar with the collateral ligaments, right? You got your MCL, your LCL. Those are the ones that, because the knee doesn't allow motion like this, how do you prevent motion like that? You got to have some thickened parts of that capsule that kind of prevents you from going valgus and Barrett. When you flex your knee, those ligaments get put on slack. And the reason they get put on slack is because they are slightly posterior to the bilateral axis. So when you flex your knee, they get put on slack. That's why my athletic trainers have to put the knee in different positions to test different things. So the bilateral axis of the knee isn't right smack in the middle, it's kind of more in the front. So the sartorius, even though it starts in the front, even though it crosses the hip in the front, it spirals around and it actually crosses the knee in the back. It has a posterior crossing of the knee joint. And that's what makes it a knee flexion. So again, if you only went by looking, you'd be like, that's a hip flexor and maybe a knee extensor. But it's not, it's a knee flexor because of how it crosses. Okay? Now, when the knee is flexed or bent, the sartorius also pulls in a direction of internal or medial rotation. Not when the knee is extended, because the knee doesn't spin when it's here, it will be flexed. Okay? Medial rotator. Now, on your circle, you don't have any medial or lateral rotators. Why? Because it's based off of anatomical position. So that's where you're going to have to make a little note. So most students box the internal rotators. They just kind of do like a little dotted line box for the internal rotators when the knee is flexed. I always looked at the sartorius as kind of like the Great Wall of China. I know y'all think I've been drinking. And you know what? Maybe I have. But look, I always like to look at the sartorius as kind of like this wall that separates compartments. It kind of separates my quad stuff from my adductor stuff. I always just kind of seemed like it was kind of a border that kind of separated those two parts. So maybe the adductors could be the Mongolians. I'm sorry, dude, I'm excited. The new Mulan movie's coming out. I'm into that kind of stuff, man. Let's get down to business to discuss the rectus femoris. Bad picture. And the reason it's a bad picture is because that dorn sartorius is kind of in the way. So let's get a pretty picture with it not in the way. All right, so the rectus femoris is, okay, I think there's some ways to put this. Well, you had precedent. Remember we talked about when we learned about the tricep, you had like medial head, lateral head, and then long head, like something different, but these are like way different. So the way I think about a muscle like the rectus, and I'm going to show you another adductor muscle, is that the lead singer of a rock band is usually like, they usually go off and do solo stuff, because they're usually like kind of the star and stuff. So the rectus is kind of like a star, quad. And the reason it's the star is because it does other things that the other musicians don't do. Your other quad just function at the knee because they don't cross the hip. The rectus goes off and crosses the hip and does cool stuff. Right? Look at me, I'm special when I do more stuff. So rectus femoris is one of your 4 quad muscles. But again, apple, banana, strawberry, sledgehammer. Vastus medialis, lateralis, and these rectus femoris. Why doesn't it have a vasti family name? Because it goes off and does something that the others don't. So they named it significantly different because of it. Okay? As I mentioned before, we're looking at anterior inferior iliac spine. But the important thing here is just how straight and direct that crossing of the hip is. So, like in other words, it's just straight up right on the AP axis. It's not lateral, it's not medial, it's just literally right in the front. A simple hip flexor, but the knee function is what we're here to talk about today. Blending into a common quad tendon, passing through the patella. Patella tendon is still part of the same tendon. The reason we call it different things is location, location, location. There's precedent with that all over the body. The difference between blood plasma and interstitial fluid, it's the same stuff. But if it's in the vessels, it's plasma. And if it's in your interstitium, it's interstitial fluid. Location, location, location. So this is the same rope, but where it's located relative to the patella is why we call it something different. Location, location, location. So passes through the patella, inserts on this big blue knot, we call it tibial tuberosity. Crosses in the front, pulls in the direction of the extension. Now, remember, was it last class I talked about how youth have different injury concerns than older people? That insertion of that rectus and those other quad muscles is literally right by a growth plate of that tibia. And I think it was Connor, maybe it wasn't Connor, but remember I said, like, if you tap your shoulder a few times, it's not a big deal, but if you do it for an hour, you're probably gonna get bruised. And so with youth, very active youth, specifically youth who are very tight, they have tight muscles, and they're very active, pulling on that unfused growth plate area can cause some growing pains. In the knee specifically, they call that Osgood-Schlager's disease. It sounds harsh, huh? Especially like real diseases, people die from. You're not going to die from Osgood-Schlager's disease. But growing up having Osgood-Schlager's disease, people thought I was a freak. I had these big, bony prominences. They look like Pinocchio noses. I actually had surgery to remove mine. But when I used to do this, my tibial tuberosa would come out to about right there. It was a cool party trick. And actually, I wish I still had it because I could show knee rotation a lot more because the nose would be like that. But I'd keep hitting the people in the front row. So what was that? What was happening there? Well, what was happening is that, as we know, and look, this is just basic physiology. I'm a basic dude. The reason you have growth plates is to lay down cement, to lay down bone, right? So they kind of lay down bone. Well, obviously bones grow circumferentially, they grow longitudinally. Circumferentially is based off of stresses that you put in. Longitudinally is based on your genetic code. Your bones know how tall you're going to be when you're born. So that means if you're not happy with your height, you chose the wrong parents. Just got to choose your parents wisely, okay? But you can't make someone taller. And no, I'm not talking about, well, first thing in the morning, I'm a little taller, right? Yeah, I'm just talking like you can't train someone to be 7 feet. So the point is along these growth plates, dude, that's where you lay down the new bone longitudinally. So all of a sudden, you get these constant stresses happening perpendicular to it. And that can actually cause what we call a bone growth reaction, a stress reaction, where the bone, instead of growing up and down, starts to grow at an angle. It grows out. Apophysitis. Fun word to say. So my point is, dude, maybe I could have been 6'1" if I wouldn't have had Osgood-Schlager. So I kind of started growing out a little bit. This is where I think athletic training, sports medicine, physical therapy can really help kids, man. Because when I was suffering, and guys, when I say suffer, I know it's not like a kid who has cancer. I'm not relating it to any of that kind of stuff, but I was miserable. There were times after games, my dad would have to carry me from the car because my knees were so stiff and I couldn't move them. They were hurt. Or the first half, I'd be fine, but then at halftime, when my knees got cold, it hurt so much. And so then, especially on the basketball court, this is your life. I'm going to need Dr. Phil. I'm giving you stories so that you can relate them to the future. So I was addicted to Flexol, which is like icy hot, right? So basically what I would do is I would drench my knees in icy hot to try to make the pain go away. Well, I didn't know anything about it. We didn't have gloves with it, so I had slick hands from all icy hot, the balls flying out of my hand. People were getting in their eyes. It was bad. Although there's a true story. Sorry, Coach Larson. I learned that icy hot is a stimulant. So like before I'd run 400, I'd have my hands full of ice out. Take you more. Oh Lord, maybe that's what's wrong with me. Maybe it was all that inhaling of icy hot. Oh Lord. So my point is, guys, is that when kids, especially kids, man, I have a soft spot for kids, and that grew exponentially when I became a father. But when kids are complaining of these kind of joint pain stuff, growing pains, a lot of times, bro, those kids are stiff and tight. And they could just be born with stiff muscles. But the reality is that a lot of those kids, like me, what was my vice? I lived out in the country. And and my brother and sister were both older than me. So anytime I had free time, I was just playing video games in my room. So I was in shortened positions, I was in a sling. Dude, summers were the worst, man. I literally just eat. So of course I had snare drums and the doctors, and this isn't their fault. We didn't know back then about maybe what's the real cause of it. That's why we do research. So the doctors were like, oh, your knee hurts and it's where the quad inserts. So go stretch your quad. Or they immobilized me. That worked real well. They were like, oh, it hurts when you do this. Well, let's not have you do that. We're going to put you in a immobilization. Okay? So now we know it's very tight. It kind of makes sense that if this is tight, and remember all these muscles have to work as a team, then these guys have to overcome other things that can't do their job as well. Just all that kind of stuff. So the rectus passes through the patella, inserts on what they call the tibial tuberosity, which is right by a growth plate. Right by a growth plate. Let's see where we're at. We got a few more minutes. The patella, in terms of being talked about as increasing the angle of pull of the quad, right? Like you may have been introduced to that. And I'm not saying that's not true. Like when you go to kick a ball, having that patella push out the quad to insert angular, that's great. But the true magic, the true out-of-the-box magic of that patella is in closed chain settings. And being able to push on that femur. When you have the stuff above it pulling up and the stuff below it pulling down, and they cancel out linearly, but they work together horizontally. And they literally drive that patella to push in the direction of knee extension, hip extension, and ankle plantar flexion. That's when you can thank a patella. And that advantage comes with a price. Compression plus movement perpendicular to the compression, that's friction. So having that son of a gun compressed in while you're moving the femur about it can wear away that cartilage. Okay. My athletic trainers know these fun words, man. I love these fun words to say. We'll call it patellofemoral pain, the costa, or oh gosh, Brian. Wait, the earth cooled and dinosaurs roamed the earth. Chondromalacia. Sorry. It sounds like a foreign country where T'Challa, the Black Panther, lives. Chondromalacia. Guys, that is when you have enough wearing away where you run out of stuff to make it a nice smooth ride. And those little bits and pieces of hyaline, they don't just magically disappear. They kind of live there and they're just kind of floating around. And that's what you're feeling when you do those kind of things, right? Just life friction. All right, let me get you the other vasti muscles, and I'll talk to you a lesson that Dr. Bob taught me. Dr. Bob, remember, is the orthopedic surgeon when I was at Auburn. He oversaw our fellowship, our athletic training fellowship, that emphasized youth injuries. It emphasized injury issues with youth. Dr. Bob used to say about that patella is that the only way we can get that patella to do its job is if we keep that train on the track. and tremendous push forces involved, so you kind of want to make sure you keep it in the same spot. And so it naturally has a groove, a femoral groove that it can groove on. But you better keep that train on that track. You better keep it on that groove. So remember, muscles don't just move as they stabilize us. So he would talk about how the patella, you can kind of see it like a spoke on a wheel, and you have these different spokes, and he mentioned these ligaments here, and the vastus medialis there, and the vastus lateralis there, and all these different things pulling on that patella in different ways to try to keep it where it needs to be while you grind the femur up and above. Okay? So reality, it's not necessarily moving the patella about the femur, it's in these closed chain settings where these tremendous forces are keeping the femur on the patella. Kind of cool. Think about it. Okay? So a couple of these muscles that have angulation to help to stabilize is the vastus medialis and vastus lateralis. So you have the vasti families, kind of like the perineums in the lower extremity. It was kind of version up by the upper extremity. And so you have one that's more on the inside, medialis, and it kind of has a vertical and oblique pull to it. But here's what I want to make sure we understand. The obliquity to these muscles have nothing to do with this function. The obliqueness to those muscles is trying to keep that darn patella on that train track. Your rotators are going to be your flexors, because that gives you the angles that you need to spin. The patella tendon passes straight down. There's no obliquity to the tendon. It's kind of like when we talked about the pec. Yeah, you have lower fibers of the pec, but when they blend into that tendon and that tendon cuts straight across it, it doesn't really matter. The tendon runs straight down. So the obliquity that these muscles have really is to try to keep that patella from shifting lateral or medial translation of the patella. We don't want gliding, right? We call that gliding patella. We call it gliding. And here's another cool party trick that you guys know about. When you're in anatomical position, you can glide that patella. You can slide it around and move it around, right? But when you flex the knee, and all of a sudden that patella goes into that groove, you don't want it to be sliding. You don't want it to be sliding around. That's what it sounds like, guys. When you dislocate your patella, it sounds like this. One of the things Dr. Bob would tell us is, he's like, sometimes you could look at medicine as being a bookie, and you're playing the odds. Can you injure yourself in sport? Absolutely. What are the odds? And he would talk about these numbers. Like if you dislocate your shoulder, you have like an 80% chance of doing it again. And if you do it another time, you have like a 90% chance of doing it. And that's kind of the same thing with your patella. If you dislocate your patella and you don't go in and do surgery on it, it's kind of like when you have the slinky as kids and you play with it, but if you stretch it too much and you kind of reach its yield point, you bend it, right? That slinky ain't never going back to being a slinky. Right? So this picture extracted, we magically took away the rectus. The rectus kind of lives on the top. So that way you can see underneath it, you see that vastus intermedius, medialis, lateralis. So again, why would, someone's been doing squats or this and that and other thing. Well, sometimes people can come and literally knock it, like if you're playing football, then you're in a position, someone can come and knock your patella and shift it off the tracks, that's bad. But again, sometimes maybe a muscle just doesn't fire on time. Maybe a muscle just, a stabilizer muscle was supposed to recruit to keep it there and it didn't, and all of a sudden, one muscle that used to be recruited a lot literally helps to translate that sucker out. It's rare, but mistakes happen. Accidents happen. Okay. Any questions? Yes, third.
The back part of your quadriceps as a whole, would that be more of your vastus intermedius?
What do you mean the back part?
Like you're showing this view, but as far as behind that, in the middle, would that be the vastus intermedius?
You mean like behind the leg? That's your hamstrings. Yeah. That's your hamstrings. But, what's cool? I'm glad you brought that up. The vastus intermedius serves as a muscle pulley. Remember how I taught you muscles can serve as pulleys? Like the brachialis and the bicep brachii gets to live on top of it, so it has a better mechanical advantage, right? Same thing here. So your vastus intermedius is deep, and your rectus gets to piggyback on top of it to have a better mechanical ankle pull. So thank your vastus intermedius tonight. You go to sleep. All right, guys? All right, got going.